The day my father-in-law clinked his champagne glass and called my restaurant a Whitmore family legacy, I was standing in the back hallway in my chef's coat, holding a tray of amuse-bouches I had spent 3 days perfecting, trying very hard not to cry. I didn't cry. I went back to the kitchen and made sure every plate went out perfect, because that's what I do. That's what I've always done. My name is not on the sign out front. It says Whitmore and Sons Fine Dining, which is funny because there are no sons. There's just me and the recipe book I've been building since I was 19 years old. Let me start at the beginning, because none of this makes sense unless you understand how we got here. I grew up in a small town in eastern Tennessee, the kind of place where the gas station has better biscuits than most sit-down restaurants. My grandmother taught me to cook before I could read. Not recipes. She didn't believe in written recipes. She believed in understanding. She would make me smell every spice before I touched it, make me feel the difference between dough that was ready and dough that needed another minute. By the time I was 12, I was making Sunday dinner for 20 people without breaking a sweat. I moved to Nashville at 19 with $400 and a notebook full of dishes I had invented in my grandmother's kitchen. I worked every station in every restaurant that would have me: prep cook, line cook, pastry assistant, sous chef. I slept in a studio apartment, so small that my bed folded into the wall. I ate standing up over the sink most nights. I didn't care. I was learning. When I was 24, I met my husband at a charity dinner where I was catering. He was charming and funny, and he looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room, which was not something I was used to. His family was old Nashville money, real estate, commercial development, the kind of wealth that has its own gravity. I was a girl from eastern Tennessee with flour on her shoes. His mother was polite to me in the way that certain women are polite when they've already decided you're temporary. I should have paid more attention to that. We got married 2 years later. It was a beautiful wedding. I made the cake myself. 6 tiers, lemon chiffon with elderflower buttercream, because that's who I am. Even on my own wedding day, I'm thinking about the food. My father-in-law approached me about 3 months after the wedding. He said he'd been watching me for a long time and that he believed in my talent. He said the family wanted to invest in something real, something outside of real estate. He said, "We want to help you build something that matters." He had a location already picked out, a building they owned in the Gulch, one of Nashville's most sought-after neighborhoods. He said the family would front the build-out costs, the equipment, the first year of operating expenses. All I had to do was bring my food, my vision, my recipes. Think of it as a partnership, he said. Family takes care of family. I was 26 years old, and I had been dreaming about my own restaurant since I was 12. I said yes before he even finished the sentence. I worked on the concept for 8 months before we opened. Every dish was mine. I hand-wrote the original menu in the same kind of spiral notebook I'd been using since my grandmother's kitchen. I negotiated with farmers in Grundy County for heritage pork. I drove to Kentucky twice to meet a cheesemaker whose aged Gouda I wanted to feature. I spent 6 weeks testing my flagship dish, a slow-braised short rib with sorghum glaze and pickled field peas, until it was exactly right. My sister-in-law contributed one thing. She picked the font for the menus. When we opened, the response was extraordinary. We were booked out 4 weeks in advance within the first month. A food critic from the Nashville scene called it the most exciting debut restaurant in years. My short rib dish got written up in Food and Wine. People were driving from Memphis and Knoxville to eat there. My father-in-law gave a lot of interviews. He talked about the family's vision, the family's investment in Nashville's culinary scene, the family's commitment to using local ingredients. A journalist once asked who developed the menu, and he said, "It's very much a collaborative family effort." I read that quote in the car on my lunch break and sat there for a long time. But I told myself it was fine. The food spoke for itself. People who mattered knew who was behind it. I was getting to cook, really cook, at the level I'd always wanted. I pushed the discomfort down and went back inside. Over the next 3 years, we opened 2 more locations, one in Franklin, one in Brentwood. Each one used my recipes, my sourcing relationships, my training methodology for the kitchen staff. I was effectively the executive chef of all 3 locations simultaneously, while also being described on the family's social media accounts as a member of the Whitmore team. My husband, when I brought this up, would say I was being sensitive. It's just marketing, he said. You know what you built. His brother, who had never worked in a restaurant in his life before joining the family business, was listed on the website as Director of Culinary Operations. I want to say I fought harder than I did, but I was tired. 12-hour days, 6 days a week. Running 3 kitchens, training staff, writing seasonal menus. I didn't have the energy to also fight for credit, so I told myself credit didn't matter. What mattered was the work. The 4th location changed everything. My father-in-law announced at a family dinner that they were planning a flagship location downtown. Bigger, more upscale, the crown jewel of the Whitmore brand. He was already talking to investors. He mentioned a number, a buyout offer from a hospitality group based in Atlanta, and the number was $2 million for the brand and all its assets. I asked as casually as I could manage, what happens to the recipes? He looked at me like I had asked something strange. The recipes are part of the brand assets, he said. They transfer with the sale. I set down my fork. Here is something I did quietly, 2 years earlier, that I had never mentioned to anyone in that family. I hired an intellectual property attorney. On her advice, I had documented everything. Every recipe, time-stamped, with my original handwritten notebooks as source documents. Every email where I described a new dish to my husband before it appeared on the menu. Every text where I sent photos of my test plates to my grandmother asking for her opinion. I had filed copyright registrations on a collection of my signature recipes under my own name. My attorney had also reviewed the original partnership agreement very carefully. In all the excitement of opening, the family had used a boilerplate operating agreement that defined the culinary concept as my contribution to the partnership, which meant the underlying recipes and methodology legally belonged to me, not the LLC. They had never thought to change that, because they had never thought I would matter enough to push back. The week after that family dinner, I had a meeting with my attorney. Then I went to my father-in-law's office and asked to see the term sheet from the Atlanta group. He slid it across the desk. I read it carefully. The sale included all proprietary recipes, menus, and culinary processes associated with Whitmore & Sons fine dining. I slid it back. I'm not signing this, I said. He laughed. Not a mean laugh, a dismissive one. The kind of laugh men use when they think you don't understand something. You're not being asked to sign it, he said. The LLC signs it. You're an employee of the LLC. I'm a partner in the LLC, I said, and the culinary IP isn't owned by the LLC. It's mine. My attorney has the documentation. The laugh stopped. I want to be honest about what happened in that room because I've thought about it a lot since. He didn't get angry right away. He went through several other emotions first. Confusion, then recalculation, then something that looked almost like respect, and then, finally, a cold kind of anger that told me he had decided this was a problem to be managed. We'll get our attorneys involved, he said. Please do, I said. What followed was 4 months that I do not enjoy remembering. The family froze my access to the restaurant management systems. My husband stopped sleeping in our bedroom. My mother-in-law called my own mother to tell her I was destroying the family. I showed up to the Franklin location one Tuesday morning and my key card didn't work. I had to stand in the parking lot and call my sous chef to let me in through the back. That was the moment I stopped being sad and started being done. My attorney sent a formal cease and desist. The family's attorneys pushed back. We went back and forth for 6 weeks. Meanwhile, the Atlanta deal was on hold because the buyers did their own due diligence and discovered the IP dispute. They were not interested in purchasing a brand whose core culinary assets were in litigation. The deal collapsed. My father-in-law called me personally after that. His voice was different, the charm was gone, and what was underneath was not pleasant. He told me I was being destructive. He told me I didn't understand what I had been given. He told me that without the Whitmore name and the Whitmore money, I would have been just another line cook with a notebook. I let him finish. Then I said, "The recipes were in the notebook before I ever met your son." I hung up. 3 weeks later, I received an offer of settlement. They would acknowledge my contribution to the culinary concept in all future marketing. They would give me a 10% ownership stake in the LLC. They would put my name on the upcoming flagship location as executive chef and co-creator. 10% after building everything they had from the ground up. I declined. We went to mediation. The mediator, a retired judge who had seen everything, spent 45 minutes reviewing my documentation and then spent 15 minutes privately with the family's attorneys. I don't know exactly what was said in that room, but when the family's attorneys came back to the table, their posture was different. The final agreement took another 6 weeks to negotiate, but here is what it said. I retained full ownership of all original recipes and culinary methodologies. The 3 existing locations could continue using my menus under a licensing agreement, and they had to pay me a royalty for every quarter those recipes remained on the menu. If they wanted to include any of my dishes in the flagship location or any future locations, they would need a new licensing agreement with updated terms. My name would appear on all menus, all marketing, and all press materials as the creator of the culinary concept. And the Atlanta buyout, if it ever happened, would require my sign-off, because you cannot sell something you don't own. I also filed for divorce. That process is still ongoing, and I'm not going to talk about it here, except to say that I have a very good attorney for that too. Here is the part people always want to know: do I regret it? Do I wish I had just signed, taken the money, moved on? No, and I'll tell you why. 6 months after the mediation settled, I quietly approached a different investment group, one I had been introduced to through a Nashville food community connection, a group that was interested in backing a chef-led restaurant concept with a strong culinary identity and documented IP. I pitched them my vision for a new restaurant, my name on the door, my concept, my ownership structure designed correctly from the first conversation. They said yes. The new restaurant opens in East Nashville in 4 months. It's smaller than the Whitmore locations, 42 seats, open kitchen, prefixy menu that changes every 6 weeks. The day we signed the lease, I went home and called my grandmother. She is 81 years old, and she lives in the same house where she taught me to cook. She cried a little. I cried a lot. I went back to the first spiral notebook, the one with flower stains on the cover and a tear in the binding from being opened so many times. The short rib dish is in there, in my handwriting, dated 2017. Long before I walked into that charity dinner, long before I said yes to a partnership that never actually saw me, the Whitmore locations are still operating. They still serve my recipes, and they pay me every quarter for the privilege. I see the checks come in, and sometimes I think about my father-in-law calling me just another line cook with a notebook. I think about that a lot, actually, because the notebook is the whole thing. The notebook was always the whole thing. They just never understood that, which is ultimately why they lost. My grandmother has a saying she used to repeat in her kitchen while she cooked: "You can't own a fire you didn't light." I used to think that was just something she said. Now I have it on a note card taped to my office wall, right above my desk, right next to the signed lease for a restaurant that has only ever belonged to me. I still have that first spiral notebook. The cover is warped from a coffee spill that happened sometime in 2018, and there's a page near the back where the ink bled through because I was writing too fast and too hard. The way you do when an idea is arriving faster than your hand can move. That notebook existed long before Mitchell, long before Harlan called my food a Whitmore family legacy into a microphone, while I stood in the hallway holding a tray I had spent 3 days preparing. What I've come to understand is that what happened to me wasn't really about recipes or royalties or a $2 million deal falling apart. It was about what happens when people confuse proximity to something valuable with ownership of it. Harlan was close to the food. He funded the kitchen, signed the lease, gave interviews, but being near a fire doesn't mean you lit it. And I think, on some level, he always knew that, which is exactly why the question of ownership made him so angry when I finally raised it. I used to feel guilty for not speaking up sooner, for 10-hour days that became 12, for watching my name get quietly erased from every press release while I told myself the work was enough. But I don't think guilt is the right thing to carry from this. What I should have trusted, earlier, was my own judgment. Not just about food, but about people and situations and the difference between a real partnership and an arrangement that only runs in one direction. That kind of clarity is something you have to build the same way you build anything, slowly, with attention, through experience that sometimes costs you something. The attorney I hired 2 years before everything came apart. That decision came from a place of knowing, even if I wasn't fully ready to admit what I knew. Some part of me had been paying attention all along. The documentation I kept, the timestamps, the emails, the copyright filings, none of that was paranoia. It was integrity applied practically. It was the understanding that your work has value and that protecting it is not aggression, it's honesty about what belongs to you. And then there was the part that was hardest, staying at the table, not walking out when Harlan's attorneys pushed back, not dissolving when my husband stopped sleeping in the same room, not letting the weight of 4 months of conflict convince me that being exhausted meant being wrong. That kind of endurance isn't something you find when you need it. It's something you've been building quietly the whole time. Every early shift, every dish you made until it was exactly right, every time you chose to go back into that kitchen instead of quitting. I think about my grandmother saying you can't own a fire you didn't light. She was talking about cooking, but she was also talking about everything. The people who tried to sell what was mine didn't lose because I fought harder or hired a better attorney, though both of those things mattered. They lost because the foundation of what they were claiming was never real. You cannot sustain something built on someone else's work and someone else's name while pretending otherwise indefinitely. Eventually, reality has a way of reasserting itself. The new restaurant opens in 4 months. My name is on the lease. The notebook is on my desk. That's the whole story.